Hello, everyone, and welcome to Literary Tales. I'm your host, Paul Krause, and in this episode, we explore the social, political, cultural context of the plays of Euripides. The acme of Euripides' literary genius coincided, as we should know, with the Peloponnesian War. As such, it isn't surprising that his later plays deal with war, slavery, and sexual degeneracy, all things that had come to grip the once splendid city of Athens, which still haunts the specter of Western civilization today. Electra, Hecuba, Andromache, the Trojan women, and Iphigenia in Aulis all have the horrid spectacle of the Trojan War looming over them. But Euripides isn't so much depreciating the heroic ideal of that war as much as he is providing extensive social commentary on the consequences of the Athenian war with the Spartans. Though pretending to be plays from a long ago war, the war plays are rooted in an ongoing war that has been bleeding Greece dry. Moreover, his war plays also examine who suffers most from the horrors of war and what becomes of humans as a result of war. His plays are, therefore, esoteric commentaries on the dastardly consequences of the Peloponnesian War, as well as reflections and refinement on the importance of pity in our lives to bring healing and peace to a battered and bloodied world. Euripides was no proto-feminist, though contemporary feminist readings often misconstrue the female-centric nature of some of his plays. Euripides often depicted women as nymphomaniacs, and Aristophanes satirized this side of Euripides in his plays, especially the women at Thesmorphia. However, Euripides was not without a strong sense of empathy and pity for the plight of women. After all, it is from his pen that we see the plight of women in war, more so than in any other of the Greek playwrights. Euripides may have been empathetic to the plight of women, but his plays are meant to shock his audience into pity, thus making him the great tragic playwright of pity in the Greek world. The Trojan Women was written on the eve of the gambit which would ultimately bring about the downfall of Athens, the Sicilian expedition. In this way, Athens' current moment in history correlated with that of the Argives, a sea expedition for a faraway conquest. The play may have been an appeal for peace, and in fact, it probably was. After all, Euripides loathed war and exposed its naked hollowness in his war plays, which do not focus on the Trojan War itself, but its disastrous consequences for those involved. Among the war plays, there is a constant and haunting image that recurs: the separation of a child from a mother, which ends in death. In fact, the tearing apart of children from the arms, the metaphoric womb, if you will, of the mother, is a constant recurring image in Euripides, especially the war plays. Astyanax is ripped from the arms of Andromache. Iphigenia releases herself from the warm embrace of her mother, Clytemnestra. Polyxena is also taken away from Hecuba. In its more brutal form, Agave rips apart her own son at the dramatic conclusion of the Bacchae, and Medea slaughters her children's, having smothered them with her coldly and ironically deadly affectionate embrace. Iphigenia's death, her separation from her mother, is the most noble, in some sense, of the children's sacrifices that Euripides concerns himself with in his various war tragedies. But Iphigenia in Aulis has the image of a voluptuous virgin woman being whisked away by lust for force all over its pages. In his opening monologue, Agamemnon speaks of how the Greek army had assembled at Aulis. He fell in love, she fell in love, and he carried her off to his ranch in the Iden Hills, Agamemnon says, referring to the elopement of Paris and Helen, which sparked the Trojan War. Helen is taken away from the bedchambers and arms of Menelaus, thus sparking the Great War that all Western civilization knows. Or was it? The third choral ode in the play reminds us of the lust-infested environment that permeated the context of the Trojan War and of ancient society. Helen was the offspring of rape. She is the daughter of Leda, thanks to the lustful advances of Zeus. As the chorus of women sing of the doom that has befallen Troy and its women, they sing, "All this because you, Helen, child of Leda, and the arch-necked swan." If the story they tell is true, that the swan was really Zeus, or is this only fable, called from the poetic annals, not worth asking? The master ironist ends with a poetic twist. It is important to know the fable of Helen's birth by rape. Euripides suggests to us, yes, it is important that we know that Helen's birth is from a rape. In fact, forgetting that Helen was the child of such sexual violence lessens the context and recurring images of lustful violence that Euripides inserts into his plays. Not only is Helen taken away by Paris by force, Helen herself was the offspring of a forceful imposition of a high god onto a princess. Lust knows of no boundaries, and war knows of no boundaries either. What was conceived in lust will only bring lust and ultimately misery. Even Agamemnon, hardly an upstanding and noble figure, speaks an ironic truth when he says, "The Greek is possessed by a kind of lust to sail at once to this foreign land and put an end to the raping of Greek wives. They will kill my daughters in Argos. They will kill you and me if I break my pact with Artemis." It is true that Agamemnon had vowed with Artemis to sacrifice his virgin daughter to procure safe passage to Troy as atonement for killing the sacred deer of Artemis. But Agamemnon's aside, nearing the conclusion of the play, also reveals the contradictions surrounding Helen's departure from Greece to Troy and the central role of lust in sparking the Trojan War. Earlier he had said she had fallen in love with Paris and seemingly joined him on her own free will. Here, however, Agamemnon reveals the darker and older account of Helen's forceful abduction by the lustful deviant Paris. Helen, though, is not without blame. The circumstances surrounding her persona is one of unmitigated sexual lust, whether with Menelaus or Paris. She has the sexual appetite that cannot be tamed. Perhaps this is fitting, given that she was born of Zeus's uncontrollable sexual appetite. In any case, Euripides subtly reveals that the Trojan War was born from rape. First, the rape of Leda by Zeus, which gave birth to Helen. Second, the rape of Helen by Paris, which is implied when he says that the Greek army is intent on ending, quote, the raping of Greek wives. When Achilles returns to speak to Clytemnestra, having failed to persuade the Greek soldiers to release Iphigenia, the uproar among the troops reveals that in lust there can be no marriage or family. In the violence wrought by lust, there can only be blood and bruises. Achilles was earlier introduced as a gullible hot rod boyfriend. His hair, body, and armor shined and dazzled all. He was the image of beauty and perfection when first introduced. Returning to Clytemnestra, he is bruised and soiled in dirt and mud. He barely escaped with his life. So much for the great killer in the Iliad. Achilles' hatred toward Agamemnon has been well known, ever since Homer recounted their rivalry in the Iliad. If Euripides' account of the feud between the two Argive heroes of the Trojan War is true, then Achilles was the unwitting pawn in a game of lustful desire on the part of Agamemnon, and it is understandable why he hates Agamemnon. Clytemnestra and Iphigenia were under the impression that the now ripe daughter was to be wed. Clytemnestra believed Achilles to be the chosen groom. Achilles, when it was earlier revealed that Agamemnon had used his name to deceive Iphigenia's hand in marriage, was outraged. "No, King Agamemnon has insulted me. He should have asked my permission if he wanted to use my name to trap his child. It was my name that made Clytemnestra bring her to him." Yet Achilles' outrage is somewhat ambiguous. It seems like vanity is the primary reason for Achilles' rage. He was distraught that his name would be forever tarnished as the lure of the innocent Iphigenia to her death. He doesn't seem to have that much concern for Iphigenia, at least initially, though he somewhat haphazardly redeemed himself in his attempt to save Iphigenia from the bloodlust of the army calling for her murder. The atmosphere of deceit, lust, and rape is what makes the ending of the play so tragic, but also so powerful. Iphigenia freely wills herself as the innocent sacrifice. Up to this point, we have been reminded of the constant misconduct of forced impositions. Zeus raped Leda, Paris abducted Helen, Agamemnon deceived his family. In the midst of this storm that would make even Lucifer smile, Iphigenia, that white-cloaked, ruddy-faced, flowery-haired maiden, stands out as the only truly noble individual in the play. This does not make her death and separation from Clytemnestra less tragic. It also serves to magnify our rage at Agamemnon, who tries to rationalize his actions and present himself as a helpless and hapless man, forced to do what he did because of the displeasure of the gods. Agamemnon refuses to take responsibility for his actions. No one takes responsibility for their actions throughout the entire play. The chaos that has been unleashed as a result can only be remedied by the one heroic heroine who does take responsibility for her actions and assumes the responsibility of others. This is what makes Iphigenia's separation from Clytemnestra so touching and so moving. But we should not become so attached to Iphigenia's heroic sacrifice of herself, so that the Greeks may secure the blessings of a safe passage to lay waste to Troy. This is not Euripides' point. Instead, he wanted to show the hollowness of war itself, and the fact that innocent victims, often virgin women, are those caught up in the maelstrom of the crisis of sacrifice and war. Indeed, war and sacrifice go together, which only magnifies the barbarism of war from Euripides' point of view. Why did Iphigenia have to die? To secure the bloodlust of the Greek army, which would unleash a decade-long war and the death of tens of thousands of more. The sacrifice of Iphigenia did not bring an end to death. It only served to bring further death. Moreover, the haunting image of a fertile daughter being sacrificed for the end of war is the most scandalous image that Euripides can produce to reveal the horrifying reality of war. A woman who was of ripe age to bring forth new life into the world was thus taken away from her mother and prospective husband and children and sacrificed in the first river of blood that would consume many tens of thousands more. It is the coming of age daughters who suffer the most from the horrors of war. That is what Euripides is communicating to us in Iphigenia in Aulis. What makes Iphigenia's death stand apart from the other children torn from the arms of their mothers is the fact, as mentioned, that she willingly allowed herself to be sacrificed to Artemis, though Euripides also writes a play in which Iphigenia survives, perhaps in part due to her nobility in taking on the wrongful misdeeds and irresponsibility of all parties involved in her death. But that is not neither here nor there. The same cannot be said for the shrieking screams of Astyanax when he is torn from the loving arms of Andromache in the Trojan Women. Like Iphigenia in Aulis, the Trojan Women gives a contradictory account of Helen's role in the origin of the Trojan War. Nevertheless, lust still permeates the environment, at least concerning Helen's role in bringing misery to Hecuba, Andromache, and the litany of other Trojan widows who are now suffering under the tyrannical yoke of concubinal slavery. As the leader says, "Troy, unhappy Troy, where so many thousands of young men were lost, all for one woman's sake, one wanton lust." The death of Astyanax is a haunting image. Not only is he flung from the battlements of Troy, but he is forcibly ripped from the arms of Andromache by the barbarous Greek soldiers. Astyanax runs back to Andromache and hides in the comfort of her arms. Talthybius, the reluctant pawn of violence, walks up to Andromache and tears the babe from her comforting and loving arms. As he tears the young child away, the boy screams in pain and sorrow. Such a spectacle on stage must have struck at the heart of the Greek audience, which fancied themselves the pinnacle of civilization and humanity, even though Euripides satirizes this self-conception of exceptionalism. "You barbarians!" Andromache yells at the Greek soldiers. "What un-Greek cruelties can you invent? Must you kill a child, wholly innocent?" After throwing Astyanax from the walls headfirst, the Greek soldiers return with him on a shield, in an ironically cruel image. At first glance, one might think the Greeks are treating his deceased and mangled body with a certain respect and honor. They have, after all, brought him back on a shield to his mother to receive a burial. They have even washed him clean of the blood and dirt of his murder, though his bruises and mangled body still reflect the torment he had suffered. However, the image of Astyanax curled up on the shield as if asleep evokes the loving image of a mother watching over her sleeping child. It is, in fact, a cruel mockery. Without knowledge of his murder, Andromache would have thought Astyanax being returned to her comforting and loving arms. But Andromache is absent. She has been sold away into slavery to be the mistress, slave of Neoptolemus. Instead, it is Hecuba who is present to receive the bruised and battered corpse of Astyanax. She weeps in the place of Andromache and says, "It is not you, but I, your grandmother, an old, cityless, childless crone, that has to bury your torn body, wasted, lost forever, all those cuddles, all that care, all that watching you while you sleep." Euripides' literary genius is brought to the fore in Hecuba's soliloquy to Astyanax. He links that image of a curled and sleeping babe on the shield with Hecuba watching over him in his sleep prior to the desolation of Troy. Neither can share each other's love anymore. Once revealed, the image is one that moves the audience to tears, to hear the lament of Hecuba as she cuddles the lifeless body of her grandson. In the Trojan Women, Hecuba is presented as a pitiable woman who has had everything torn away from her. Her surviving daughters are to be sold away into slavery, or killed. Andromache, more a daughter to Hecuba than Helen ever was, is also flushed away into slavery. Yet the theme of virgin desolation remains. Earlier in the play, Cassandra is ripped away from Hecuba by the Greeks. In her despair, Hecuba laments, "I saw my virgin daughters, bred for bridegrooms of the highest rank, torn from my arms, and all their breeding thrown to foreigners." Part of the shock value of Euripides is to depict the horror of war without its romantic overcoat. Cassandra is dragged away into captivity. We know from the various stories about Agamemnon's death that Cassandra will die upon her arrival in Greece. Astyanax, too, is ripped out of the arms of Andromache, as if forcibly being torn from her fertile womb, only to be murdered in the most gruesome and barbaric, the most un-Greek way possible. Hecuba continues the degeneration of Priam's pitiable wife. Cassandra has been taken away, Astyanax is dead, Andromache has been stowed away. Now Polyxena, Hecuba's final daughter, is to be torn away from her breast. When Polyxena speaks to Hecuba, she prophesies her own death. "Pitiable woman, you will see me, your pitiable whelp, like a heifer bred in the mountains, torn from your arms and sent down to Hades, with my throat cut, to the darkness under the earth, where I, unhappy Polyxena, shall lie among the dead." As with the Trojan women, Hecuba has nothing but hatred for Helen. Hecuba's hatred for Helen is motivated by her love for Troy, for her dead children and husband, and for the love of Polyxena, the last incarnate flesh of love that she can touch. When Odysseus is breaking the news of Polyxena's fate, Hecuba implores Odysseus to take pity and slaughter Helen instead. Achilles should have asked for Helen to be slaughtered at his grave. She brought him to his destruction at Troy. "I beseech you not to tear my daughter from my arms. Do not kill her. We have dead bodies enough. This girl is my delight. In her I forget my sorrows. She is my comfort, and takes the place of many things. She is my city, my nurse, my staff, my guide." It is noteworthy to see how Hecuba associates her last surviving daughter with her city, her home, her very being of life. Homer says that the bad man is the one who is lost to the clan, lost to the hearth, lost to the old ways, the one who lusts for all the horrors of war. In a heart-wrenching moment, Hecuba even offers her place on the sacrificial pyre, so that Polyxena may live. But not even Hecuba's offer of replacement is good enough for the Greeks. Polyxena must be sacrificed. In another touching scene that moves the heart, but also inculcates shock and rage, Polyxena kisses her mother goodbye one final time. "No, my dear mother, give me your sweet hand, and let me press my cheek to yours. For never again shall I look upon the radiant circle of the sun. This is the final time. You are listening to my last words. O my mother who gave me birth, I am going away to the underworld." Polyxena is subsequently taken away and killed at the grave of Achilles, as her blood pours over his tomb. Hecuba's metamorphosis from a truly pitiable woman to a ravenous dog is the arc that Euripides wanted to construct. This is not because Hecuba is to be shunned for her barbaric actions in blinding Polymestor in revenge for his killing of her youngest son, Polydorus, but to again provide shock value concerning what war does to human beings. Hecuba's transformation from that most unhappy and pitiable woman to a dog with fire-red eyes is because she has been lost to clan, lost to the earth, lost to the ways of the old world, and finally consumed by the horror of war. That is why the spiraling death cycle of Hecuba is truly tragic. Not only has she lost her family and fatherland, she has become a cold-blooded murderer, like those barbarous Argives who butchered her grandson and killed her daughters. The play opened in the environment of captivity, the tent of Agamemnon's captives. That Polydorus's ghost is the first character to speak also inculcates the specter of death over the entire play. Of course, death is how the play ends, when Hecuba and the captive women blind Polymestor and kill his sons, having lulled them into a false sense of comfort upon his arrival on the shores of burnt Troy. The arrival and blinding of Polymestor recapitulates the opening scene of captivity and death, when he is blinded and his sons slaughtered in a tent of captivity as revenge for his killing of Polydorus, and Hecuba's cathartic release, her catharsis, for having been brutalized and barbarized over the course of the war. Euripides provides ironic, scenic closure to the sad and sorry tribulation of Hecuba. That which began in captivity and death ends in captivity and death. When we are slaves to war, we become conduits of death, and death touches everything. The war plays all center on women. This is perhaps the most noteworthy and noticeable aspect of Euripides' plays. Iphigenia, Hecuba, Andromache, alongside Cassandra, Polyxena, and Helen, all factor prominently. They are the leads in their plays. That Euripides concentrates on women as well as children, like Iphigenia, Polyxena, and Astyanax, also reveals the message that Euripides is trying to tell in his bleak tragedies. War destroys women, most of all. We see voluptuous virgin brides to be sacrificed and murdered. We see mothers and grandmothers deprived of the very fruits of their womb, the joys of their life. We even see, in Hecuba's metamorphosis, how war consumed the most pitiable woman in the ancient world, who lost some 50 children, her loving husband, and city she called home, and resided as queen, into a cold-blooded killer, just like her captors and the Greek conquerors, whom she asked to take pity on innocent children, only to kill innocent children once deprived of family, hearth, and homeland. Euripides doesn't romanticize war. He deconstructs its horror and bloodshed and shows us, bleakly and starkly, what the reality of war does to humans. We mustn't forget that Euripides' prime was set during the Peloponnesian War, as we opened this episode with. Euripides' world, literarily and physically, was saturated in war. In the bloodshed that saw tens of thousands of young men killed and hauled off into slavery, in the bloodshed that saw tens of thousands of women and young virgins widowed and spouseless, Euripides' dramatic tragedies ultimately appeal for peace and pity. It is hard to ascertain whether Euripides really saw the family as important as Sophocles or Aristotle. But what is clear is that war destroys families and brings even greater destruction in its wake. The screaming of Astyanax is ultimately the calling of the womb of fertility. It is the cry and the scream of the womb of life. The recurring image of Euripides' war plays is a child being torn apart from the loving embrace, the womb of their mother. Even if it is doubtful that Euripides held a high view of the family in the same way that other notable Greek thinkers and writers did, his plays do reveal the horrifying destruction of families that war brings. Those who glorify and romanticize war are often men who have never loved and never had a family. Here it is important to remember that Euripides did have a family, and that he had to suffer through the carnage of the greatest war since Troy, the very war that his plays are contextually set in, but remind us of the war between Athens and Sparta. Euripides lost his own son, Xenophon, in 429 at the outbreak of the hostilities between Athens and Sparta. The loss of his son in war undoubtedly prompted his empathetic and pitiable sentiments toward women. A society that is enslaved by war is a society that cannot bring life into the world, as all his war plays show. The war plays of Euripides underscore this reality, and hauntingly so. But in these war plays, we find something profound and indeed healing. The pathway out of this entrapment is, for Euripides, through pity. Pity is the great pathological and emotional feeling that Euripides tries to instill through his plays. The shocking and scandalous imagery that Euripides uses is meant to force his audience into pity for the victims of wanton sacrifice, cruelty, and butchery. Pity offers us the way out of that society enslaved by hatred and war. Pity allows us to connect and come together with those brutalized, bruised, scarred, and made barren. And perhaps, as Euripides entails and implies, pity may very well help bring peace and life to a world destroyed by war.